The funny thing about silence is that you get used to it. After 4 years, I had learned to stop listening for the phone. My name is Dorothy Mae Calloway. I am 63 years old. I live alone in the same house where I raised my daughter, in a quiet neighborhood outside of Columbus, Ohio. The oak tree in the front yard is taller now than when she left. The kitchen still smells like the cinnamon candles I used to burn every Sunday morning. And the chair at the head of the dining table, the one she used to sit in, still faces the window the way she liked it. Because I never had the heart to turn it around. 4 years, 2 months, and 11 days. That is how long it had been since my daughter last spoke to me. Not a birthday call, not a Christmas text, nothing. Just the particular kind of silence that only a child who is still alive can make. I had replayed our last conversation so many times that the memory had worn smooth like a river stone. She had stood in my kitchen, this same kitchen, and told me I was the reason her marriage was struggling, that I had never liked her husband, that I had tried to control her life. I had stood there holding a dish towel and tried to explain, tried to reach for her, and she had walked out the front door without looking back. I never knew a person could grieve someone who was still breathing, but I had built a life around the absence. I volunteered at the library on Tuesday mornings. I took a watercolor class at the community center. I had my neighbor Pauline for coffee every Thursday, and my sister Ruth called every Sunday evening from Phoenix. I was not happy exactly, but I was functional. I had made peace, or something that looked enough like peace to fool most people, including myself. Then one Thursday in October, I came home from Pauline's to find a package on my porch. It was a flat white box, about the size of a shoebox, wrapped carefully in brown paper, and tied with a piece of twine. My name and address were written in handwriting I did not recognize. Printed, careful, almost deliberate in its neatness, there was no return address. The postmark said it had been mailed from Nashville, Tennessee, 3 days earlier. My daughter lived in Nashville. I stood on my porch for a long time before I picked it up. Inside the box, wrapped in tissue paper, was a tin of shortbread cookies. They were homemade. I could tell by the uneven edges and the way some of them had browned a little more on one side than the other. There was a small card tucked beneath the tin. The card read, "I've been thinking about you. I hope you're doing well. From someone who cares." No name, no signature beyond those 4 words. I sat down at my kitchen table and looked at that tin for a long time. I am not a suspicious person by nature. I am the kind of woman who leaves her front door unlocked during the day and still believes that most people, when it really comes down to it, are trying their best. But something about that package unsettled me. Maybe it was the missing return address. Maybe it was the careful, printed handwriting that seemed to be disguising itself. Maybe it was the vagueness of the card "someone who cares," which is the kind of thing you write when you don't want to commit to being known. Or maybe it was simpler than all of that. Maybe it was just the timing. My birthday was in 9 days, and the only person connected to Nashville who had ever known my birthday well enough to care was the same person who had not spoken to me in 4 years, 2 months, and 11 days. I opened the tin. The cookies were wrapped individually in small squares of wax paper. They smelled like vanilla and butter. They looked perfectly fine, and yet my hand stopped halfway to picking one up, and I set the tin back down on the table, and I left it there. I don't know how to explain it. Call it instinct. Call it the particular wariness that comes from years of reading a situation before it reads you. I just did not eat one. I told myself I would wait. I told myself I would think about it overnight. The next morning, my friend Pauline called to say she was dropping by with seedlings from her garden, the way she does every fall. While I was making coffee, I mentioned the package, the tin, the unsigned card. Pauline is the kind of woman who finds beauty in everything. She clapped her hands and said, "Oh, Dot, maybe she's reaching out. Maybe this is the beginning." She saw the tin on my table and asked if she could try one. And this is the part I have to be careful about, because I have been asked many times since then why I let her. The truth is that I hesitated. I told her I wasn't sure where they'd come from. I told her I had a strange feeling. Pauline laughed not unkindly and said, "Dorothy Calloway, They're cookies. They're not going to bite you." She took one. She said it was delicious. She took a second one home in her pocket for her husband Gerald. I want you to understand that I stood in my kitchen doorway and watched her leave, and I still did not eat one myself. Whatever that instinct was, it had not let go of me. That afternoon, I did something I had been telling myself for 4 years I would not do. I called my daughter's number. It rang 4 times and went to voicemail. Her voice on the recording was exactly the same as I remembered it, and the sound of it hit me somewhere behind my sternum, like a fist wrapped in something soft. I left a short message. I said I had received a package I believed might be from her, and I was calling to say thank you, and that I hoped she was well. She did not call back that evening. She did not call back the next morning either. What I got instead, at 10:15 on Saturday morning, was a phone call from Gerald. Pauline had been rushed to the hospital in the early hours of the morning. She was in the ICU. She had been violently ill through the night, vomiting, severe abdominal pain, and something affecting her heart rhythm that the doctors were still working to understand. Gerald's voice was very quiet and very controlled in the way that men's voices get when they are holding themselves together through sheer force of will. He said the doctors had asked about anything unusual she had eaten recently. I sat down on the floor of my kitchen. I actually sat down on the floor, right there between the table and the refrigerator, because my legs stopped working. The cookie she had taken from my tin, I told Gerald. I told him everything: the package, the unsigned card, the Nashville postmark, the fact that I had not eaten one myself because something had told me not to. Gerald was quiet for a moment, and then he said, "Dorothy, you need to call the police." I looked at the tin still sitting on my kitchen table, and I understood that I was looking at evidence. I called the police. I told them exactly what I had told Gerald. Within the hour, 2 officers were at my door. I handed them the tin, the tissue paper, the brown paper wrapping, and the card. I told them about the Nashville postmark. I told them about my daughter and the 4 years of silence. I told them about the strange feeling I had never been able to name. One of the officers, a young woman with red hair pulled back tightly, wrote everything down without expression. The other one bagged the tin in a large plastic evidence bag and told me not to touch anything else from the package. Before they left, the red-haired officer turned to me at the door and said, "You mentioned you had a feeling about these. Can you tell me more about that?" I thought about it. "The card said someone who cares," I said, "but someone who actually cared would have signed their name." She nodded slowly. "We'll be in touch." The next 48 hours were the longest I have lived since the night my husband passed away 6 years ago. I sat in my house and I waited. I called the hospital twice. I was told Pauline was stable but still in serious condition. I did not sleep well. I sat in the kitchen at 2 in the morning drinking tea I didn't taste, thinking about my daughter's face the last time I had seen it, thinking about the careful printed handwriting on the brown paper, thinking about 4 years of silence followed by a package with no return address. I kept coming back to the same question, and I kept flinching away from it because the answer was something I did not want to hold in my mind. On Monday afternoon, the red-haired officer called. She asked if she could come by. She did not tell me over the phone what they had found. She came to my house with a colleague, and they sat at my kitchen table in the same chairs where Pauline and I drink coffee every Thursday, and they told me that the cookies had been tested positive for a substance, a compound used in certain types of pest control that is acutely toxic when consumed by humans, particularly in concentrated doses. I heard the words, and then I sat very still for a moment, the way you do when something has just rearranged the furniture of your entire understanding of your life. "Someone put poison in them," I said. I was not asking. "Yes," the officer said. "Enough to make a person very sick. Potentially enough, depending on how many were consumed, to be fatal in someone elderly or with a pre-existing heart condition." Pauline had a heart condition. She had had it for years, Gerald knew. Her doctors knew. And I knew, because we had been friends for over 20 years. The question I had been flinching from stopped being a question. Someone had known that I was elderly. Someone had known that I would likely share the cookies, or that I would eat them myself, or both. Someone had known enough about my life and my habits to make a calculation. "Have you been in contact with your daughter?" the officer asked. "I left her a voicemail on Friday," I said. "She hasn't called back." The officer nodded. "We're going to need to speak with her. I don't know how to describe what it feels like to hear those words said about your child, about the person you held in a hospital room in the very first minutes of her life, when she weighed 8 pounds and 2 ounces and had your grandmother's nose." I sat at my kitchen table while the officers left, and I did not cry. I was somewhere past crying, in that flat, gray place that exists on the other side of shock, and I tried to build a version of events in my mind that did not lead where every thread was pointing. I could not build one. My daughter called me that evening. I looked at her name on my phone screen for 3 full rings before I answered. Her voice was careful, measured. She said she had gotten my voicemail. She said she was sorry she hadn't called sooner. She had been busy. She asked how I was doing. She asked, and I remember the exact tone she used. Light and casual and almost offhand. If I had enjoyed the cookies. "I didn't eat them," I said. There was a pause. A very particular pause. Just a beat too long. The kind that you feel before you hear it. "Oh," she said. "Why not?" "I gave them to Pauline," I said. "She's in the hospital." Another pause. Longer this time. "What happened?" Her voice had changed. Something had moved under the surface of it. "The doctors found something in the cookies," I said. "The police have been here. They're going to want to talk to you." The silence that followed was different from all the silences that had come before. It was not the silence of a daughter who had nothing to say to her mother. It was the silence of someone who had just understood that something had gone very wrong with a plan. "Mom," she said finally. "Don't," I said. I said it very quietly. "Please don't." I heard her breathing on the other end of the line. I thought about the oak tree in the front yard. I thought about Sunday mornings and cinnamon candles. I thought about 8 pounds and 2 ounces and my grandmother's nose. "I need you to know," I said, "that whatever happens next, I am your mother. And nothing that comes out in the next weeks and months is going to change what I know about who you were before all of this." She didn't say anything. "But I am also going to tell the truth," I said. "I am going to tell the truth to whoever asks me, because Pauline is my friend, and she is in the hospital. And she has a husband who loves her, and she deserves that." The line went quiet for a long time. And then my daughter said, very softly, "I'm sorry, Mom." She hung up. The investigation took longer than I expected, and it was harder in different ways than I had prepared myself for. There were more phone calls with officers. There were questions about my daughter's life in Nashville that I could not fully answer, because I had been excluded from it for 4 years. There were things that came out that I had not known about her finances, about a business that had struggled, about a life insurance policy that had been taken out in my name 18 months earlier by someone I had never authorized to do so. That last detail, the insurance policy, was the one that finally broke through the remaining wall of disbelief I had been maintaining. I sat across from the detective handling the case, a heavy-set man named Morrison with kind eyes and a careful way of delivering information. And he slid a document across the table toward me. I looked at my own name on the policy. I looked at the beneficiary line, and then I put the paper down and looked at the wall for a while. "She needed money," Detective Morrison said. Not unkindly. "Just as a fact." "I know," I said, because by then I did. There were things I also learned that I had not expected. Things that did not fit the clean story I had been constructing in my mind. I learned that my daughter's husband, a man I had met twice, at a wedding I had barely been welcome at, had been controlling her finances for years. That the business failure had been largely his doing, that she had been afraid of him in ways she had never told me. In the same years she had been pushing me away. That the plan, I cannot call it anything else, had not been entirely hers. That did not absolve her. I want to be clear about that. Nothing about what I learned made me look at that police report and feel nothing. Pauline spent 11 days in the hospital. She came home with a damaged heart valve and a recovery that is still ongoing. That is real. That happened. The fact that my daughter was also suffering does not erase what she did or tried to do, and I have had to sit with the complexity of both of those things being true at the same time, which is one of the hardest things I have ever done. She was arrested in November. Her husband was arrested 2 days later. I did not go to either of their hearings. I could not make myself do it. Pauline came home on a Thursday, which meant that the following Thursday, she was sitting at my kitchen table again. Thinner than before, moving more carefully, but sitting there with her coffee cup in both hands, the way she always does. Gerald sat beside her and held her hand across the table. I looked at the two of them, and I thought about how close I had come to spending the rest of my life at a table with an empty chair across from me. "You saved my life," Pauline said. "By not eating one." "I didn't do anything," I said. "I just had a feeling I couldn't explain." "That's enough," Gerald said. "Sometimes that's everything." I have thought about that a great deal since then. About the difference between the version of events where I reached into that tin that first evening and the version where I set it back down. About how thin the line is between a story with one ending and a story with another. About the fact that for 4 years I had been grieving a living person. And it turned out the loss was even more total than I had understood. And also that the story was more complicated than the simple one of a daughter who had turned cruel. I still do not fully understand what happened to my daughter in those 4 years. I understand the facts. I do not understand how a person gets from one place to another, from the girl who sat in that chair at the head of my dining table to the person who mailed that tin from Nashville. I think about it more than is probably healthy. My therapist, a gentle woman I started seeing in January, tells me that understanding everything is not the goal, that I can hold the grief of losing her and the anger of what she did in the same hands, without one canceling out the other. I am working on believing her. The oak tree in the front yard is losing its leaves now. From my kitchen window in the mornings, I can see the light coming through the branches differently than it did in summer. More direct, less filtered, and it lands on the kitchen floor in long, pale rectangles that move slowly across the tile as the morning goes on. I have my coffee. I sit with what I know and what I don't know. I think about Pauline's coffee cup waiting on my counter for Thursday. Some mornings that is enough. Some mornings it is almost enough. And on the mornings when it is not even close to enough, I do what I have always done. I get up, I get dressed, and I carry the weight of it into whatever the day requires. Because that is what you do. Not because you are especially strong or especially brave, but because the days keep coming, whether you are ready for them or not, and somewhere along the way, you either learn to walk into them or you stand at the door forever. I choose to walk in. That is the whole of the story, and the whole of what I know how to tell you.